Okay, and welcome everybody to episode 2 of this season of Digital Transformation, or DX Leaders. Very excited to have a fantastic group of experts here today. My name is Lars Födisch, journalist by passion, storyteller by even more passion, and I'm very passionate about to have our co-host and moderator Andreas Enderlin with me again today. Hi Andy, how are you doing?
Very good, thank you, Lars. The first time that you call me Andy, so I'm feeling good. No, very glad to be here also on behalf of the Swiss Cham and the DX Leader team. A very warm welcome to all the panelists.
Yeah. So as usual, we have a quick introduction on the topic. We have a great deep dive on what today's topic means, and I'll reveal that in a second. And then we have a fantastic panel with awesome guests today. We have Blaise Jacholkowski, the Principal Consultant, Pharma and Life Sciences, Digital Health at Zülke. We have Dario Heimann, PhD and Chief Research Officer at Galen Growth. And last but not least, we will have Miguel Rivera, Business Transformation Head, Asia at Novartis. Welcome, everybody. Everybody ready for a fantastic discussion today?
Yes, absolutely.
Good. Excellent. So today's topic, finally, I should maybe announce that. It is effective leadership, a panacea for healthcare sustainable digital future. So last episode 1 of our second season, we looked into the interconnectivity among diversity, leadership, and digital transformation. So today we do a deep dive on what does it mean in the healthcare spectrum and industry. Before we start, just a quick context on this is not just a webinar series. It's in conjunction with a fantastic opportunity for companies, individuals, consultants, partners to get profiled and get awards for the fantastic work they've done. Andreas, can you share a little bit more about the Digital Transformation Awards?
Yes, with pleasure, Lars. So so as you mentioned, this whole exercise is actually part of the overarching Digital Transformation Award. And we're looking this year actually at ASEAN. So we started last year in Singapore, and now we're really expanding to the region. So Clarissa, if you can go one further. All right, so you were mentioning already, what happened last year. So last year, this was the first edition, and basically there are 2 elements. There is this award and the DX Leader webinar series that we have today. So the Digital Transformation Award is really about recognizing digital transformation initiatives within companies, and that can be in MNCs, that can be in startups, that can be in SMEs, it doesn't really matter. We wanted to create a platform for everybody, especially during the lockdown here in Singapore, to really exchange and to showcase what they have done. And the DX Leader webinar series is really about bringing together, like today, the best experts to talk about topics, to really kind of have fruitful discussions, network, and exchange on the latest ideas. So that's basically the frame that this whole digital transformation is all about. So last year it was a big success, and this year we are hopefully extending on that success. So Clarissa, if you go one further. So this year is really about extension to ASEAN, right? So as I mentioned before, we are asking SMEs, startups, non-profit organizations, MNCs to hand in their applications. And you can see these are the different categories. We have now a new category around cybersecurity, which I think is a very big topic also in healthcare. Building infrastructure is a new category. Logistics, we're very happy to have that category. And then the ones that we will talk also today, healthcare and also insurance is a new category. And as you can see, this is broadly anchored in the ecosystem. So we have tremendous support from Enterprise Singapore, from SG Innovate, but then also from all the chambers. We have the AmCham that actually joined this year. So that's an honor, as a Swiss chamber to have the AmJam joining in. We have the Germans, we have the French. So this is really just a very good feedback for us that we are on the right track. As you can see, our esteemed sponsors, without them, this would not be possible. So very, very big thank you to all the sponsors. It's really great to have you on board. So if we go one further. All right, I'm not going to go into all the details, but if you are out there and you're interested and you say, well, that's maybe something for us, we're happy to share all the details. But basically, it's going to be a closed door selection of the applications where we have a jury that selects, the best applications, and then we will go into a public pitching, which will be happening with the jury members, but then also obviously with the public. And I think that's a great opportunity to showcase what you have done to build your brand and to also use it as a platform to kind of bring the word out to the world. Okay, one further. Now you will ask yourself, how are they assessing digital transformation? So again, that's a big topic, right? But we have developed together with Deloitte, our partner, we have developed a maturity model which is touching on these 5 elements. I'm not going to go into the future into the details, but you can be assured that this is a very objective way how to assess these projects. One further, Clarissa. So, and as a wrap up, if you're out there, I think what you can really gain out of that, apart from the prices, which are significant, I would say, this year we were able to kind of increase the prize money. But again, it's not all about the money, right? It's about really the network and kind of bringing the word out to the world. But, the prize money obviously should be a motivation. But it's really also about recognition of your digital efforts. It's about best practice exchange. It's about addressing new networks, new customers. So what we have seen last year is really a lot of companies that have participated were actually able to gain new customers. And I think if we can, provide that platform, that's just a great thing to do. And then obviously you will get a digital certificate, which will give you insurance that this is really the right application that was out. All right, one further. I think this is pretty much it. Back to you. Oh, you are on mute.
Yeah, well, I was just so stunned because he said we want to go into the future, and I was thinking about the DeLorean is coming in. Future episode. But yeah, also maybe one thing to just back it up, the awards as well as the webinar, it's an activity for all of ASEAN. So it's not just a Singapore activity, it's an ASEAN activity, and brought to you by SwissGem and Deloitte, who making it happen and possible. Okay, let's kick the topic of healthcare with the poll for the audience. So which factor will influence the future of healthcare the most? So we looked at 4 key options here. Is it regulations? Is it technology? Is it the healthcare professionals? Or is it the patient? So let's launch the poll and see what our audience thinks. What's the main factor that will influence the future of healthcare? The beauty of this, you have to make a call. It cannot be, it depends, or it's this and that. So you have to make a call. Andreas, if you would have to pick one, which one would you choose?
I think the patient. I would say the patient, because until now, I think the patient has been a bit, in the background and is now stepping forward with personalized health and so on. So I think the patient will be driving a lot of these changes.
Okay, cool. So while the last ones are voting here, also a reminder, the webinar is always about, the first part is a discussion with our esteemed panelists, and then we will answer questions from the audience. So my recommendation, put your questions in rather early, because we're always running out of time to answer all the questions. So in your Zoom console, you have the Q&A function, not the chat function. Use the Q&A function, put your questions in there early, and or if you think there are other brilliant questions, you can actually upvote them to make sure that you that we'll answer the ones that are of most interest. Okay, let's close the poll and have a look at what our audience thinks today. What's the most important factor to define the future of healthcare? Technology actually is the winner here. Okay, patient comes in third. That's interesting. Well, it's a digital transformation webinar series, so maybe that by nature puts it in a little bit of a category. Thank you. So let's bring it over to our first speaker on the topic. Les, are you surprised that technology seems to be the most important factor according to our audience?
Well, yes and no. I mean, no one understates the importance of technology, but I still think that technology, is nothing if you don't have people behind it willing to use it, and if technology doesn't really answer to the needs and cater to the pains and generate gains for all the users of a stakeholder, as the stakeholders of a system. So I think technology for me doesn't really come first.
Okay, and I think we'll later go into technology. Yeah. What's the horse? What's the carriage? What is the meaning? What's the end? Right?
Exactly. But Blaise, if we stick with you, maybe you have been an innovation consultant in many different companies. You have been in health tech, in med tech, in healthcare companies, traditional ones. And so there are a lot of trends happening, and one of this trend is obviously consolidation, because we have seen a lot of health tech companies, startups coming to the forefront, but then also established companies like GSK and so on to kind of accelerate their initiatives. So how would you see that trend accelerating now in terms of consolidation? Is that really going to happen, or is this just a temporary thing?
Well, I would rather say that actually the industry becomes more integrated than consolidated. Indeed, if I look at the digital health industry, which I know the most, there is currently a proliferation actually of small players. And the only signs of consolidation I saw for the past 2 years were in the telehealth space, where you had some M&A activity. I see though an integration around the patient journey. And it's really thanks to some licensed players also, such as Philips, for example, who developed the Health Suite platform. That data is not staying so much in silos anymore and can be processed for clinical decision support, for example, and where separate standalone solutions or applications can be orchestrated. And this is essential to have such digital platforms powered by a solid cloud infrastructure, as the amount of data that every connected patient generates is huge. I mean, some devices collect more than 10 gigabytes of data per patient per day. So you multiply this by the number of days and the number of patients, and you quickly end up with an exabyte of data. And this is just for one indication. Yeah. But besides that, there's also a convergence, I would say, that rather than consolidation between traditionally separated sectors, such as pharma corporations and medical devices corporations and tech companies. They have to work hand in hand together in order to make it happen.
Thanks. And, I think we already are so excited about the topic that we're diving in, but we know that you also want to share and give a little bit of a framework on the topic so that we have maybe a framework to put our discussion on later. So can you share a little bit from your experience as that innovation consultant in the sector, a little bit of how does it fit together?
Sure. Thank you very much, Lars. So I have indeed a few slides I would like to share with you. So we can immediately go to the next slide, please. So let's start with the two numbers. So do you know what they represent? Well, you have actually a hint in the title. So next slide. So the first number is the number of hours that a patient with a chronic condition spends with his or her disease every year. The second number is the time that this patient spends on average in France, but I think it's also valid in other developed countries, with his or her general practitioner. So you can completely understand here that the doctor can only see a tiny fraction of the life of a patient during this time. During the consultation, the doctor will ask questions to the patient about the evolution of his or her disease and the changes in symptoms. The patient will have to remember what happened in the maybe last 6 months and provide a qualitative feedback in a few words, relying on his or her memory. Knowing that most of the patients with chronic diseases are usually elderly people, the account of what happens will not be very reliable and precise, to say the least. Then the doctor will make a few measurements such as temperature, blood pressure, breathing pattern, and try to draw some conclusions out of this. But are these measures significant? They represent only a few data points on a given day at a very specific time. What if a doctor would have done the same measurements the day before, the week before, or at the patient home when the patient is more relaxed, as going to the doctor's office is often being stressful, or even during the night? So it's quite clear that collecting meaningful data 24/7 during a long period of time and being able to visualize it on a dashboard would be much more valuable in order to generate insights about the patient's condition, trends, and establish a proper diagnosis. This remote monitoring is technically feasible today and seems the obvious thing to do. It would improve the quality of care, make the treatment more personalized, and reduce overall costs. So why is it not happening at scale yet? And what the heck is wrong in our healthcare system, you may ask? So maybe if you go to the next slide, you can see here that if you look at the structure of a healthcare industry as it is today, it's a pretty complex system. We usually look at what we call the 5 Ps. As you can see, the policymakers on the left-hand side, the payers, the pharma corporations, the healthcare providers, and of course, the patient at the center. And we already see that the alignment between all of these parties is not so obvious, as they do not have all the same incentives, and there are many barriers to collaboration. And actually, there are even more players, such as the ones listed on the right-hand side, and they're all part of the value chain. So some of them do actually benefit from this status quo. And actually, long before the COVID-19 pandemic hit and put under the spotlight the healthcare system flaws and gaps in infrastructure, the slow to change culture and silo mentality, we knew that we had to change the model. So if you go to the next slide, I think the challenge today is more on the organizational side. All stakeholders need to develop a new mindset, acquire new skills, and work differently. And as you know, there's always resistance to change. So we need visionary leaders such as Vas Narasimhan, for example, the CEO of Novartis, in order to make it happen. Today, the balance between progress in medicine, technology, and affordability of these innovations is still not there. And there's a long way to go. But personally, I'm fairly optimistic that the digital transformation will now accelerate. So we're not going to enter here into the details of about all the barriers, but focus more on the benefits of looking at the whole patient journey and how technology enables to capture the data and connect all of these steps together, ensuring what we can call the continuum of care. Next slide, please. So on the left-hand side of this slide, you can see that it starts, with the healthy state. So patients are in good shape, and you have here a lot of consumer technologies which became ubiquitous and enable people to be more actively involved in managing their health, which is called the participatory part of the precision medicine movement. So these people want, some of them, optimize their well-being, but they also just want to stay healthy. We call it the quantified self movement, when people use wearables, genetic testing, and other connected devices to get access to daily data, which influences their behavior and helps to detect early on potential anomalies. There are some digital health solutions, actually, which even calculate a health score and suggest some lifestyle changes to improve it, and even identify health risks. Then when you feel sick, you enter into the medical territory when you get diagnosed, hopefully as early as possible, where you have a lot of established technologies such as imaging, X-rays, molecular diagnostics, and all the omics, proteomics, metabolomics, and so on technologies. But now you also have these patient platforms, which connect patients together. Then you move on to the treatment, when there is a lot of digital innovation happening with some software certified as a medical device, which is quite a novelty today. They also call digital therapeutics if they're evidence-based. It's an emerging category, and even they are replacing, in some cases, drugs, notably in the mental health area. And finally, the monitoring part, which is fairly new, but I believe is a real game changer. It includes algorithms which try to predict a potential relapse in the remission phase, for example. You can see here that all along this journey, there are plenty of digital solutions, applications, devices, which can tremendously change the outcomes of the patients. Not only the clinical outcomes, but also other outcomes which matter to patients, such as quality of life, as we can now more and more measure or collect these outcomes through patient-reported outcomes electronic questionnaires, for example, directly on the smartphone. There is clearly a shift from what we call volume-based healthcare to value-based healthcare. But to cover this topic, we will need a full hour webinar. So last but not least, and I'm almost finished with this, new IT platforms, the line at the bottom of the slide, are being rolled out in order to provide access to all medical data in one secure place. So it's called the so-called electronic health records, also called electronic patient dossier, which would allow to connect the dots and defragment this traditionally fragmented journey. But by the way, I think on the next slide, yes, if you put on the next slide, you see that I put a red circle around telehealth and companion apps, as this is where I see most of the digital health investment since the beginning of a pandemic. So in conclusion, I think that within 5 years, this connected health patient journey powered by data and technology will become a reality. And well, I'm very happy to hear also the thoughts of other speakers about this.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Blaise. So as you said, it's a topic, and I think every episode we have that we could expand every single aspect of a topic for hours. So let's maybe after that fantastic framework, let's switch the perspective and maybe directly jump to Miguel from Novartis. So you've over 10 years of digital healthcare experience, local, regional, global. What's your take on what we've also seen from Blaise in terms of what kind of challenges do you see are faced that digital healthcare leaders are working on, and what keeps them at night? Has the pandemic changed things, or is it an evergreen topic and we're just step by step slowly getting there?
Sure, Lars, thanks. So let me maybe start with the second part of the question. So the pandemic has definitely, like most industries, accelerated change and you know made things more relevant in some cases, but also made a lot of companies, healthcare systems, ourselves, focus a lot more, right? Because maybe there was a moment in time where you were exploring a little bit your options here and there, and trying to find where is it that you need to play as a company, or where is it where you need to partner. Whereas with the pandemic, it was crystal clear that you needed to accelerate the areas of opportunities. You needed to be in touch with your customers, deliver care, etc. And then that might have some repercussions on sort of the early stage innovations or the more exploratory ones, right? And then as of the first part, I think it comes back to people, as Blaise was saying. Also on the poll, I was a bit surprised because with all my years working in digital transformation, I would say technology is not really, it's the least important thing, to be honest. It's all about the people. At the end of the day, people create systems, people interact with each other. And I mean, if I maybe add a little bit to that, it's the culture around the people, right? Understanding why is it that we're doing certain things, and why should we do them differently, that eventually creates this digital transformation. That's really what keeps me up at night.
Thank you. And maybe just a quick follow-up question, because I was just thinking about it, right? Yes, the patient should be at the center of everything, but isn't, especially in healthcare, a massive unbalance between the need for absolute expertise and certainty on the healthcare professional and company side, with a patient who just can't make a decision. He doesn't have the knowledge, and like there seems to be a power imbalance. So will that, I don't think that will go away unless you would count like I'm checking Wikipedia, and every other diagnosis I get is I have cancer and I'll die tomorrow. With that kind of imbalance, is it possible to really get the patient into control?
So I think that's a great question. I think I don't like to say the word imbalance, right? Because there's a certain level of expertise required to deliver care, so that gap will always occur. But I think things are starting to bridge a little bit, right? From patients being more informed and taking a more proactive stance on their own health, so could be checking Wikipedia, but could be doing something a bit more extensive, to using wearables and all the things that we were discussing just a bit before, so that I am more informed about my own healthcare as well, right? So my conversations with a professional maybe are one level above the traditional sense of just coming in, blank sheet of paper, the doctor tells me what to do, and either I do it or I don't, but I'm not really having a dialogue. I think patients are a bit more empowered and informed now.
Yeah. And do you think there could be a hybrid model also if we look at AI, you know, what AI is doing in terms of diagnosis and I mean, there is a certain power shift, right? Where you can kind of already kind of as a patient, you can go online and you can use AI models to basically do image recognition of your CT scanner, and it's accessible for everybody. So do you think that's also a view that will change?
Yeah, again, I would say it's not so much a power shift, more than a more efficient use of resources and time.
Yeah.
Right. So take an example from China. There are booths where you can get an AI diagnostic for GP or primary care type of diseases, right? That frees up the system so that doctors can actually have more relevant conversations with patients, right? And same thing with when you think about diagnostics. It's more, I don't think in the near term we'll have AI fully replacing healthcare professionals, right? It's going to enhance their capability, right? Where the AI might tell you, well, there might be a tumor here, you might want to look into that, and then the doctor can take some action. But fully shifting of power, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Okay. So maybe over to Dario. Just I have one question, because he's actually taking a very interesting perspective as an innovation leader, but also as an investor, right? And you have some experience to also work here in Singapore, and you have a view on Asia. And so we were talking about people, that this is all about people. And obviously, if we look into ASEAN, very different countries, very different healthcare systems. So where do you see, you know, the key trends there? Is there going to be a leapfrogging that we have seen in other areas, like e-commerce, or, you know, also in the broadband development? Do you see a leapfrogging, that they will actually adopt health tech solutions quicker?
Interesting point. So when we look into the ecosystems overall, so considering that we have the frontier markets looking into Laos, Myanmar, then we have the developing markets, Indonesia, some of the African countries as well. They're already a bit more advanced, and then we have the very developed markets. From where we are starting with the development always depends on where is the population at the moment. So when we look into Singapore, highly developed market, the technology that is already in use there and the healthcare that we have there, and it's actually now nice because I bring a bit from the title in that we actually are discussing here today. We're already between the healthcare 3.0 and 4.0, moving towards the 5.0. Versus when you look into markets that are very frontier, very developing, you are more towards the healthcare 1.0 versus the healthcare 2.0. So you are actually more trying to consolidate illnesses and actually treat them, instead of trying to move people up the value chain, finding emerging diseases and trying to cover them fast, and therefore actually prevent diseases from happening versus simply treating them. When we now look into what COVID-19 did, and it always sounds very harsh when I say it was actually the best thing that could have ever happened to the digital health space. It sounds very hard and it doesn't sound very nice, yes, but when we started off with Galen Growth back in 2015, you actually went out there and were telling people, oh, there's something that is called digital health. During that time, we already had thousands of companies out there working in that space, but nobody actually knew about it. COVID-19 actually emerged so many countries out of there. I'm in a very comfortable position. I don't really need to develop myself. That actually policymakers had to start moving in and changing the policies to kind of support companies of moving into the next phase. South Korea enabled the use of telemedicine. Germany put out their digital consolidation law that's called Digital Versorgungsgesetz, which is the Healthcare Act, to actually now use prescriptive to prescribe digital therapeutics as well. Things that we wouldn't have imagined 3, 4, 5 years ago when we all kind of started. So the entire situation was so to the point for digital health, and we had the players out there that it helped us consolidate, helped ventures to really expand themselves. Now people are like big tech companies like Apple are launching their new Apple Health, and I'm very excited about it. You kind of move it from a very niche field into a mass product, similar to what we saw with the e-commerce space as well.
Okay.
Thank you, Dario. Just a reminder to all our participants.
I'll try to be short next time.
No. No, great answer. And I think it was also great to point out where different countries sit. I just want to quickly remind everybody to put your questions, please, in the Q&A function so that we can also answer your questions. We have a long list and we can keep going for a long time, but we want to make sure that we keep it relevant for you out there. So with the transformation, right, and different countries go at different speeds. The pandemic was definitely an accelerator in many different industries. Blaise, maybe back to you. What do you think are some of the success factors that have those digital healthcare or healthcare digital transformation projects to fail or succeed? Especially, it's a typical 5 years ago, somebody said it wasn't possible. Then it became a 2-year timeline. And then suddenly within 2 weeks, you had a prototype up, right? So has that changed the whole idea of what makes it succeed or not?
Well, I think fundamentally it hasn't really changed. I would say if I talk about digital health startups, which I know quite well because I was involved in several startup acceleration programs, for example, and I've been an entrepreneur myself, so I know that side of a story and the scene as well. At the end of the day, any startup cannot be successful without the right founding team. It all starts there. So the people have to really get along well, understand each other, almost without having to finish, their sentences, have a sense of camaraderie. They will spend a lot of time together and it will be a bumpy ride. So they better enjoy the journey together. Of course, they also need to have a genuine passion for the field they are in and be relentless about understanding their customer needs and problems. And they need to be agile enough to pivot in the sense that they are on the wrong path, which requires actually to not be too much ego-driven, as this means that they have to acknowledge the fact that they might be wrong sometimes. And in digital health, there were a lot of failure and attempts to try a few things, and it didn't work out. I think now the industry has learned a lot from past failures, and it's better to fail early anyway because the cost of changes become too high later on. So this piece of advice is actually valid for any startups, but in healthcare, I think the specificity is that the complexity comes from the main stakeholders that I mentioned earlier that you have to satisfy. Yeah. I mean, indeed, there's no other industry where the customer who uses the product, who's a patient, is not the same as the person who pays for it most of the time, and where the customer cannot buy it directly without the permission of another party, which is the doctor, and the person who pays has to follow the guidelines of another party, the policy makers, who restrict you in what you are allowed to do with regards to patient medical data, for example. Yeah. And then it can get even more complicated if you look at the purchasing processes and so on.
Yeah, Blaise, I would just, and maybe also to the other panelists, I mean, cybersecurity and data security obviously is a big topic. And I've seen it myself with startups, they start somewhere, let's say as a telehealth platform, and then they completely underestimate the pressure that can come up. And you know, the requirement for data protection depending on where they are sitting, right? So don't you think that this is actually a trend that will kind of diminish a lot of startup activity, because, you know, the big players, they have the money, they have the skills also to counteract on cybersecurity?
Definitely. I mean, well, at Zulke, we see some companies coming to us, usually, well, startups, because bigger companies, they also have many needs in terms of cybersecurity, but they usually have a team dedicated to this. And startups, they take that as a afterthought sometimes, and then they come to us and say, okay, can you make an assessment of the security of our systems, because our investors wants to invest, but they want to have this validation first. And actually, we start like digging into it, and we see that actually it's not secure at all. And sometimes they claim they're very secure. So you know, there's this discrepancy which needs to be addressed, and that it's extremely important. I mean,
and then it's basically Miguel, and then it's Miguel that is working for a big MNC. He's going to say, well, you know, there is a reason why I'm working in a big MNC, because if we work together with startups, we can actually ensure that. So Miguel, how is it at Novartis? What's the topic, cybersecurity?
Well, I actually would like it to be a bit more flexible, to be honest, right? Because big corporates, we tend to be on the other extreme of things, where we might have, I'm not just talking about my experience in Novartis, right? But in general, big corporates, we tend to have not really up-to-date internal processes and regulations about security, about infrastructure, architecture, you name it, right? So when a startup comes with a novel technology, they could very well be quite validated, secure, etc. But because they use one or two generations of technology after what we have on our policies, then it becomes really challenging, right? So sometimes I think we also need to meet halfway, considering that there are, when you think about healthcare, there are very stringent legislations, regulations, etc., that always need to come in play.
And there's a certain reason why big corporates such as Novartis are always trying to partner also with younger ventures anyways, considering that the technology is always, it's often, I wouldn't say superior, but it's, since they are such an old tanker, it takes a while to stir it around. It's kind of a dinosaur. You need to kind of push them into the future. And this is why always having a young venture that is coming in with a novel solution and actually really much help the big pharma, but at the same time also get lots of their knowledge, and also help them to consolidate themselves and bring their solution to market.
Maybe jumping on the innovation part, right? Generally, and I think Blaise said that in startup world, you have the idea of fail fast. The moment human lives are on the line, failing is not an option. So how do you balance the combination of, we have to take calculated risks to move the needle forward with a leap instead of just incremental, versus, wow, there are certain risks we just can't take?
There's a reason why digital health moves as slow as it does. You can't compare it to an e-commerce platform. Yeah? You can kick out like an e-commerce platform. I can build you one within a month, and I can bring it online. Digital health ventures, from their incorporation to being a proper setup company, having a product on the market, takes you 4 to 6 years. Your burn rate is significantly longer. It takes you significantly longer to actually bring something to the market, because you need to follow the HIPAA regulation. You need to follow GDPR. You need to follow certain regulatories. There was a question earlier, which I can bring a bit in. You need to get your regulatory approval for your AI solution before the diagnostics can be put into market. It's such a regulated space. You as a small venture, you need to follow that. It needs to be a calculated risk for any investor as well to put your money in there. There's a high return on it in the end, yes, but your risk is also significantly higher, because is the leadership team of the company set up the way that they can follow and know how to navigate through this labyrinth in order to be successful? It's something that Blaise was mentioning earlier.
I think this is a great discussion. Sorry, Miguel, you wanted to say something?
No, I just wanted to add, because I hear this question a lot, right? Why is digital health so slow? I actually think it's quite fast when you consider that it's in the healthcare space, right? In the pharma industry, it takes us at the very least, it takes us 10 years to develop one molecule, right? And that's when you're very lucky, unless it's COVID.
I left pharma 12 years ago, and I saw one of the drugs I worked on during year 2 of my research I did going to market last year.
Yeah,
so this is how long that's how long
that's
pharma
quite common,
takes.
right? So getting a digital health product to the market in 5 years actually quite fast.
So, I mean, this is a very interesting discussion, because, I mean, you know, there is this topic around alternative treatments, right? We have been talking about cannabis. We have been talking also about psychedelics, you know, that is actually entering a very interesting space. And I know it's still very early stage, but Miguel, I would love to hear from you, you know, is that a topic within Novartis that these could be actually companies that disrupt, you know, some of your big business?
Well, this is my personal opinion, but it comes down to the science, right? I think there's a component of hype around these new types of products that are getting regulated or approved now. The reality is that if the therapeutic effect is good enough, it's more likely that a pharma company or biotech company has already invested in it and has developed or is in the path of developing a treatment for it, right? So you know, I think we need to start making a clear division between wellness-oriented or consumer-oriented products and real treatments, right? Where, you know, you have a higher standard when it comes to trials, safety, outcomes, etc.
Sure. Okay. Thanks.
Let's move to rapid fire, and then we already have the first questions from the audience, so we have to make sure that we have time for there. So rapid fire, I give you a question. It's a left or right, one or two, up or down kind of answer. So you have to make a stand. So I'll give you the question, and then you can answer with maximum one sentence why you chose it. Okay. So last one: digital healthcare, hype or not? Les.
Both.
Oh yeah, you're the consultant. I forgot. No.
It depends, right, Blaise?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously some parts of digital health where it's a big hype, but at the same time, for me, I'm a strong believer in it. There's a lot of hope, which, and I mentioned that in my keynote speech, that there's so much room for improvement that, of course, I think there's plenty of hope.
Okay, Dario, hype or hope?
Hope, considering it has been there and it will make in future life better.
Miguel.
Hope as well. I think there's still more opportunity than what we realize.
Okay, then the last one. If you could just, we heard about healthcare 5.0. Dario was touching on that. So what's one word or trend that comes to mind when talking about healthcare 5.0? Dario, you mentioned it, so you have to go first.
Vital signs. Considering it's all about tracking certain vitals of your body and trying to bring these data into cloud to make better predictions of what you've gathered and consolidate it.
Okay, Blaise.
I can only use one word, so I will say data, but it goes in direction of what Dario said.
Okay. And Miguel?
I would say home care, because I think to me the biggest shift is patients will start taking care of themselves at home rather than hospital.
Excellent, thank you. I think that's a fantastic kind of idea on where you stand on that topic. Let's go to the questions from the audience and start with Stephanie Willman. So Stephanie is asking, how do you get quality control with AI or respective MI when you don't know what they measure? Oh.
I don't know what they measure. We don't know what they measure.
Dario,
I can take the first part. I can take the first part of it. So the quality control that we currently have in place is not available in all markets. You rather look into the more established markets that already have a framework for digital health in place. In Singapore, it's a combination out of HSA and MOH that put this together. In the US, it's the FDA. In China, it's the CFDA. In Japan, it's the JFDA, etc. They are putting certain guidelines out there what your particular code can do and can't do. It needs to be peer reviewed. It needs to have a proper publication out there, and you need to actually track whatever you are measuring, what you are trying to establish and bring into market. So the regulatory frameworks that are already in place in certain markets are ensuring that whatever you are measuring is what you can and cannot do basically with it. When you go into more developed markets, that's the issue that I mentioned earlier. You do not have this framework into place, but it's always very challenging for you to bring a product into these markets because they simply say, we don't have a framework, I can't do anything with it. So let's not push it into market.
Blaise, anything to add on that? Because I'm sure some of your clients also, everybody want to be on the AI train, but how do you make sure it delivers value, but also how do you get the QC in there?
Well, it's all about the intended use, right? So you have to define very clearly what you intended use and then what is your risk level associated with your intended use. So usually what you do, you build a risk matrix where you evaluate the probability of every risk and the severity of every risk. And depending of where you are in this matrix, you will be class 1, 2, or 3 device. And then, of course, the criteria number one that any regulatory body would look at is safety. So is your product safe to use? And to answer to that question, they will look at your intended use. And if the safety is all right and you have put in place all the quality control measures in order to prevent most of the risks to happen, then you are in a good space. But for that, there's a lot of work to do, and that will require a whole webinar as well.
Directly jumping on a follow-up question on AI, and I think that Miguel can answer that first. What are your opinions of using AI to develop drugs? And the example here given is XTAL-Pi or STAL-Pi, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Is it really saving up to 90% cost of the research, pre-research costs?
So I'm not familiar about this particular drug, but I do know that pharma companies and we in particular are investing a lot into AI during drug development. I mean, I wouldn't know about the 90% savings, but there are definite positive outcomes out of that. There was, I think, last week something on the news about Google's DeepMind publishing something that's really complex for humans to do, which is mapping proteins, and they basically sort of changed the game forever when it comes to protein folding and shaping. So there's a lot. COVID vaccine was heavily influenced by putting together data libraries and using AI to find drug targets. So yes, there's definitely an impact. And on our side, we have heavily invested on using AI to develop our drug. We expect to see some benefits for sure.
There's a big problem, however, with the paper. If you read till the very end in it, there are certain limitations. If the protein is totally unknown, so they need to have a pre-structure of the protein to actually establish the actual protein structure and can then calculate the docking of the drug component into it. It's quite complex. XTAL-Pi is very long on the market. They've expanded into the US a few years ago. It's an old Chinese company, actually. They are doing extremely nice work also with a few big pharma companies. It's quite interesting. There are many other players in the market.
Okay. So Lars, there is a very interesting question that I would like to take, because it's going to challenge the panelists, considering that we have all men on the panel. So the question is around what can a healthcare company do in helping to solve equity issues with digitalization, such as making medicine more affordable. So that's more, in countries that don't have the healthcare access, or wider access to treatment, and so on. So any comments or any thoughts? So it's the equity issue. Is digital, can it help?
If I can, I'll take the first stab at it. So I think it definitely can. So think, especially when it comes to all the processes and steps that are required to get a medicine in front of a patient, right? So there's a lot of efficiencies that can be gained. So one example I can give you is in some parts of Africa, for example, we deliver medications through drones, right? And that has lowered the cost of delivery, right? So that's bringing greater equity to access of innovative medicines, right? But you can automate certain processes, and maybe going outside of the digital realm as well. You can come up with novel business models that have a digital component, so closer to a quote-unquote e-commerce or a direct-to-consumer model, where you may be cutting out some middlemen and creating that opportunities for more equitable access. So there's opportunities for sure.
Is e-pharma also one of of the solutions to kind of cut out the middleman and make sure that, I mean, there are less mistakes done on treatments, on how many kind of drugs are given out, or making sure the right drugs are given out to the right people, right, to take the cost out of the system.
Yeah, not just that, right? When you think about business model innovation, you can come up with and this has happened in the US already, this sort of Netflix-like model, right, where you are able to give a much lower per dose cost in exchange of better adherence, and that actually turns to better outcomes for the patient, right? But you do require some sort of digital interface to be able to do that, right? It's quite hard to do it otherwise.
And you also see that certain pharma companies are moving into the D2C business, direct to consumer. You're cutting off the middleman. You're cutting off the Zulik farmers, and you're cutting off all the other big providers out there. So that lowers your cost. You have less cost of customer acquisition. It's just natural way of consolidation.
And then they're going to give it back to the shareholders, or are they going to?
Absolutely. They're not
going to lower
the
CEO
price. And the CEO. No, of course not.
Okay.
Maybe let's move on to the next question from Joseph Tan. He asked, how about research medical records, patients' test data crossing countries or regions? Can that be a big hurdle for smaller players, or that's the common issue also faced by big pharma? And of course, how does it relate to digital transformation? Who want to take a stab at that?
Let me throw one word in there, which is called federated learning. Federated learning is the model that you want to bring in place there. You are basically not exporting the data from a certain source. You are consolidating the information at the source of where it's getting established. The trained algorithm is then sending it back to the source, to where the company sits. Something that big pharma companies, big insurance companies are not doing yet. It's many small players that are working in that space, and it's extremely interesting, emerging technology at the moment, and everyone is looking into it. Blaise can probably add to that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dario. In Europe, it's also a trend. We talk a lot about federated learning, or also secret computing, as they mentioned, they tell about it. And indeed, you don't need to access really the data to leverage and make analytics on the data. You have a kind of system that will not enter into the technicalities of this, which can use huge data sets from many different sources, different hospitals, and combine that in a way that no one has access to the data itself. So that's quite powerful, actually, and this is going to happen more and more in the next years.
But isn't that a little bit of a tricky proposal of, yes, everybody knows if we share more, everybody gets more out of it. But if I'm sitting on a pile of proprietary data and I hope I can monetize it tomorrow, why would I want to give it away? So how do you overcome that commercial issue?
A hospital can't monetize it themselves. A hospital can't go out there and say, hey, I'm having tens of thousands of hospital data, and just start selling them. What the players are doing, they're often doing a sort of revenue sharing model with the hospitals, telling them, hey, you're getting a small share of what I'm making out of it. You make money out of it. You get structured data in the end, and I'm providing other services to Miguel, for instance.
Okay, very interesting. I think, Lars, we have one last question.
Last question.
Do we have time to squeeze one in?
We always have time to squeeze one last question in. How much do ethics play a part in advancing medical research, or is there a balance? Citing the case of the CRISPR baby scientist. CRISPR, yeah, the CRISPR baby scientist. Maybe you want to tell us what's the CRISPR baby scientist for...
Oh God. So CRISPR is gene editing. I didn't really hear the question. It's totally biotech, and it's not my point of view of what we're doing. How much is
ethics? How far? What are the ethics? How far can we go at the end of the day to push the needle of advancement?
There was a very nice Netflix show recently that was actually figuring out what CRISPR can or cannot do to the society. It can be the cure for everything. It can be a curse for everything. It depends on how you're using gene editing in the end, whether you want to actually create gene babies that don't get sick anymore. Yes, you can do it. How ethical is that or not? That's a different question. To a certain extent, it definitely helps, but it always depends on how much you want to move the needle. And it's not my discussion how ethical we can or cannot be about CRISPR. Beautiful.
Just one word maybe on that. I mean, it's like nuclear technology. I mean, nuclear can be used to make bombs, or it can be used to make power plants. So it's more or less the same.
Exactly.
Kind of
Okay, then maybe let's wrap it up with one question, right? There's a so-called iron triangle of healthcare: accessibility, affordability, and quality. Where do you think digital healthcare or digital transformation will help to advance the most? Is it accessibility, affordability, or quality, if you had to choose one?
All of the three above.
Yalla, but where do you think it's the biggest potential?
Accessibility probably the most, considering there's so many people out there who don't have proper access to healthcare, and this is where digital health can really help.
Thank you. Miguel.
I mean, yeah, I would answer the same as Dario, but to bring more flavor. I think affordability would also be impacted. Think that there's a lot more people that can have access to a smartphone than access a good insurance, for example, right? And if you're able to provide healthcare through digital means to this group of people, you can make a big difference.
Thank you. And Blaise?
It's difficult to choose, but I would choose probably accessibility, because I think the scalability of digital health solutions is, of course, by nature embedded into this kind of solutions. So therefore, you can expand them much faster than anything else.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I learned a lot, and I hope our audience today as well. Andreas, I'm sure you were also. I saw you really intensely listening.
Yeah, no, very interesting. So thank you very much. I also learned a lot. So I think we achieved our goal, Lars.
So just some of the sound bites as I'm wrapping up. So Miguel said, people create systems. It was about who's at the center. It should be people. People create systems. People interact with each other. It's the culture around the people and the understanding on why they're doing things. That's what's driving digital transformation. I thought that was a great perspective. We had from Dario that is, as it might sound harsh, COVID-19 might be the best thing that has happened to the transformation of the healthcare sector. And I think we heard that from many different verticals on DX leaders before. Blaise was sharing that what makes a successful healthcare startup is that the startup wouldn't be successful without the right team. Teams need to be agile, and this requires teams to stop being ego-driven, especially in healthcare, where we're all trying to solve a greater good. So thank you for the greater good, for sharing your wisdom and insights today with us. Thanks for everybody tuning in. We are back on the 17th of August, 5 p.m. Singapore time, for Unleashing the Power of the Smart Factory. Thank you again, Andreas, Blaise, Miguel, Dario, of course, SwissGem, of course, Deloitte, Zulke, and everybody tuning in from near and far. See you in August. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.